I'm Donna Seager. This is Seager Great Gallery, and thank you all for coming. And I'm just going to be very brief and say that this gentleman came to the gallery and put a book in my hand, and he let me keep it for a while. And I took it home, and I read Beyond the Reach of Reason, and holding that uniform in my hand and reading the content of it was so moving. And the more I learned about the book itself, I don't want to give it away, so I'll let him tell you about that. The more I thought, this is a perfect artist book. It's just perfect. And I was going to say a little bit more about his background, but I think what I'll do is let Martin speak for himself. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. Some familiar faces and some unknown faces. It's always good to see. I appreciate you taking the time today to come. What I plan to do, or what I'd like to do, is I'm going to speak a little bit at first about how the book came about and the making of the book. Then I'd like to read a few poems and open myself to questions. And please feel free to ask about any of that. Can you hear my phone ringing in the background? Can you? No?
Yes.
Yes? I'm sorry, I've got to turn it off. We'll just ignore it. I apologize so much for technicals. So, I was giving a reading over at the Berkeley Library a while back. I was one of a group of veterans who were reading in terms of in relationship to a program they were running on Wilfred Owen, the legacy of Wilfred Owen, profiles of war and the search for peace. And he's probably the best known of the World War I trench poets. And if you want to learn anything about war, the trench poets from the First World War were phenomenal. Phenomenal, because they came from all walks of life. I'm not going to get into it anyway. So when I was getting that reading, in the back, there were a couple of veteran artists who had their work up. And among them was a fellow named Drew Cameron, who was an Iraq veteran. And he had put together a program that he called Combat Paper, where veterans could take their uniforms and bring them in and pulp them down to make paper out of them, handmade papers that then they could use for art projects. And Drew was showing some of his work on the paper. But that's where it first was introduced, Combat Paper. And I was just immediately taken by it. And on the ride home, I found myself thinking that I really should print some of my poems on that paper. I think just to give them a little bit more impetus, a little more oomph kind of thing. Well, then, that one thought leads to another. And so the thought of printing them on the paper became, well, you got to make a book. You got to put them together and make a book. Oh, I'm going to make a book. Oh, you got to make a cover. Oh, you got to do a binding. Which led me down all these avenues of learning more about Kevlar than I ever intended to learn. And to utilize some stitching techniques I learned at the Center for the Book in San Francisco. And so that's how the book pretty much came about. I started with the paper, and then I went to cover, and when I thought of a cover, I thought, well, what better than Kevlar? I thought, a book cover protects the pages, the book. And the Kevlar and the body armor is what protects the contemporary soldiers. The ones in Iraq and Afghanistan, back in my day, we called them flak jackets and body armor. Either way. And so I thought that was a perfect thing to wrap it in. But what I found when I began researching Kevlar, that it comes in two formats, plates and sheets. The plates are used on the front and back. And the sheets are fabric. It's a fabric that they layer for the side panels. And it's also used in industrial uses now, all sorts of things. But it only comes in bright yellow. Okay? So I'm thinking combat paper, bright yellow cover. Nah. So that's when I thought a little bit deeper and thought of the uniforms. And was able to turn to Drew when I had that idea and to get a couple of uniforms that had been donated to make paper with, from actual veterans. And he, in his great generosity, gave me a couple of fatigue jackets. And so that's where the covers came from for wrapping the Kevlar. The same as the Kevlar, the camouflage wraps the Kevlar in the body armor. And then for the bindings, I was wanting to make this book as tight as possible. When I first started working with words and pictures in the early 70s, I grew up with a fascination with how to incorporate different elements, different materials into a piece to make it more accessible to the viewer. So I brought that to this book, wanting to make it as conceptually tight as I possibly could. I didn't, anything I can look or overlook, whatever. And that's when I decided I hit upon using surgical sutures to bind for the stitching for the book. So the book then is stitched with surgical sutures that I ordered, by the mail. Put it together, and as I say in some of the beginning pieces, the same as the doctors used in their attempts to make us whole again. I don't know. Donna, should I read the Abouts page? Is that important, you think? I meant to ask you this beforehand.
Yeah. The Abouts page?
The Abouts page about what? About the book and about the writing?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Anyway.
Just that the way you said it is so beautiful because it's so personal.
All right. Well, here you go, folks. Some of you have heard this before, and I will bow to my age. Okay, so about this book, and I'm just going to read it verbatim here. The living cells of this book are words, my words, strung together to communicate my personal experiences as a combat veteran, a disabled person in this society we call America. The heart of this book is the writing, the tale telling. The body of this book is the pages, paper pulped by a veteran from uniforms worn by veterans. The skin of this book is the cover, which replicates the body armor worn by soldiers, Kevlar covered in camo fabric from fatigues donated by veterans. And the binding of this book is stitched with medical sutures, the same material used by surgeons in their attempts to make the wounded whole. And then about this writing, and it bears to the first poem I'm planning to read to. These poems are drawn from my own personal experiences as a combat veteran, a disabled person. My experience is nothing unique. It is another echo of what countless veterans from so many wars have encountered. I offer these words as voice for those not as handy with words, and for those who have remained silent. These writings are first-hand reports of shaping a life of healing. They articulate the experiences of veterans and others, offer families and non-veterans insights into not the blood and guts of war, but the difficulties veterans encounter navigating a world shaped by their military experience. And with that stage having been set, I would like to read some poems for you. And some will be familiar to some of you. And I want to say about this book also to everyone here and the future season, this is a book of the hand. It's more, and when I say of the hand, I don't mean it's just made by hand. This is a book that's made to be handled, to be touched. There are many voices in this book of veterans from the PTSD groups I've been in over the years, family relatives of veterans. They all came to me, and I incorporated and opened myself into them in the book. So it's made, their voices are here in the paper, and in the words, and in the fabric. And so don't be afraid to touch this. This was worn by some soldier. Okay? And anyway, not to over-impress things, but so please feel free to handle the book and open yourself to the many voices that are in there. So I'd like to start with a poem called Homecoming. Every returning veteran has a homecoming story, going back to millennia. You know, it's a long, long line. It seems to be in the nature of mankind, this war thing. Anyway, so this is simply my homecoming story. And I hope it opens the windows to some folks about an unseen side to the war. Homecoming. It's 5 hours airtime from the Philippines to Japan. Though dinner has ended an hour ago, orderlies feed us. It's just an overnight stop. In a sense, a 5-hour flight, merely a warm-up or dress rehearsal for tomorrow morning's flight. Dressing changes and a dose of Japanese TV. Lights come on, and they begin to move us. The canvas stretcher clips into wall brackets as a piece coming home into its puzzle. Another stretcher is lifted into place above me, another piece aiding completion. Green canvas filling my vision. Stacked 3 high, the loading pattern has issued me a middle edge. It's 12.5 hours airtime from Japan to Anchorage. Strapped onto a stretcher, both legs in casts. 12.5 hours of sleeping and thinking and staring into military canvas 1.5 feet before one's face. Periodic time, man's international dateline, tries to tell us we've arrived the previous evening, as if by resetting the clock, our transit never occurred. This body and I know otherwise. It's 3 or 4 hours on the ground refueling. Cold air. The tail ramp is opened. The Red Cross provides Newsweek from a month ago to pass time and reacquaint one with the world. Extra blankets fail to temper the chatter of unwhole bodies too soon from the tropics. It's 5.5 hours airtime from Anchorage to somewhere in Illinois. The tail ramp opens warmer, a half-intended gesture towards strapped-in cargo. Ambulatory wounded struggle past. Unloading begins. It's another 3 hours airtime from somewhere in Illinois to Andrews Air Force Base near Washington, D.C. The shortening hops tease arrival thoughts. Unloading continues. The canvas presence above me is removed. Finally, space enough to rise on elbows and roll my head. It's an hour's airtime from Washington, D.C. to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. The plane climbs only to descend. Unstacked from the plane and restacked in a bus. Rolling my head on its side through 6 top inches of window, my vision scans the anonymity of a military airbase. No euphoric soldiers kissing runways. No POW families rushing toward embrace. Homecoming, not. Rather, arrival. A geographic point on what is actually a map of recovery. Cast removed, standing reclaimed, prosthetics fitted, leave granted, a wounded heart touching intimacy. It's a journey of abilities regained while mapping the wall of disability. Homecoming is not a singular event, but rather the piecing together of a life regained. One not restored, but set anew. Some of the pieces unrecognized, others unfamiliar. All trailing a shadow of pain. Pain felt deep in the bones and on the floor of one's heart. Thank you. So that's homecoming. And I'd like to read next entitled poncho. Aside from food and water, 90% of what we carried was death and destruction. The remaining 10%, a handful of select items accorded to personal comfort. All, however, still government issued. A poncho liner, a jumbo hat, mosquito repellent, so to speak, an extra pair of socks, preferably dry, a poncho, adaptable enough that each carried two, one to be worn against cold mountain rain, and the second to be joined with another's for a makeshift shelter at night. 1.6 ounces ripstop nylon, 92 inches by 66 inches, 1.8 pounds, OG 207 in color, of course. But the poncho, like the grunt who carries it, is available for other duties as needed. As when Jake took that one wrong step and forfeited both his legs above the knee and his left arm. When Doc had done all he could in the medevac touchdown, Jake's poncho became his stretcher. We slipped him onto it. Lifting at the corners, Jake disappeared into what used to come to his knees. Suddenly, our hands are hauling in all this extra material. Where's Jake? The discontinuity between this Jake and his now grossly oversized poncho punches me hard. Anger blooms, raw, pure. Its eyes scan for targets. Jake's war is over. His biggest battle just begun. He's postmarked home, an unfathomable package for a barely adult young wife. Point something out to me, please. Connect the dots. Show me where their sacrifice and desperate suffering actually, literally, made it safe to watch your kid's soccer game. This shit stays with you, a cancer of the psyche. And once you too are home, cutting the grass, shopping for groceries, even baseball, simply fall away, holding no meaning. And standing at your family barbecue on a warm summer days, you walk into an ambush of ponchos. There we go. I think I want to sit back here and I want to read the first poem that started this series. When I first started writing again, a number of years now back, about my military experience. It's a poem I entitled Veteran's Tale. And where all these poems in this book all started with 4 lines that came into my head. It started with 2, and then it became 4 lines, and they just stayed in my head for a couple of days. And they were the genesis of all this. And they're the last 4 lines of this poem, which is why I'd like to read it to you, because this is where it all started. A Veteran's Tale. What is this self that comes knocking? This unwelcome neighbor I can't move away from. Episodes of me seared beyond memory, hardwired into brain. Of what authority do they displace the sight of shoreline rocks, disclosing ocean's colors, the sound of an ocean's breath? How to open the door and send him home. Farewell, no return. Open the door and all the windows. Tear down load-bearing walls. No edge between ocean and heaven. Neutrality abandoned for presence. I've had my fingers in the wounded. Their desperateness has taken my hand. Now I sleep nights beside my beloved, never parting skin to skin. And I think let's do more about reentry life, which is Tuesdays at 4. Here we go. We enter the room each Tuesday at 4 and close the door to all else. It's your standard issue acoustic tile drop ceiling conference room. We sit in stackable chairs around a living room center table, a living room table, and the room becomes a greenhouse. We're the multi-era vets group, 2 generations molded by wars. Wars in jungles, wars in deserts, combat, the common thread. We sometimes dip, sometimes dive, sometimes skirt, and sometimes acquiesce to life. Lives lived and lives being shaped. It's hard to put to paper the things that happen not so much within that room as between these brothers. We're a disparate lot as any band of raw recruits. A disparate lot in ages and in values, and in the truths that life has imposed upon us. We come together, the new guys and those from the first days of the group. We come in isolation and pain, venturing furtive attempts to end them. Suffering formats our bodies. Our pulse is in our eyes. We offer our own journeys to those traversing their individual minefields. We pass along what worked and didn't work, the rules and milestones of our own travels, not from A to B, but rather closing the circle from civilian to soldier to civilian. Veterans were labeled. Thank you for your service. End of conversation. So here we turn to each other as the soldiers would remain. To the rootstock of combat, we begin to graft compassion and understanding, eventually giving seed to temperament and chiseled beauty. And I cannot not read combat paper, which is, such a central part of this book. Here we go. I apologize. Okay, combat paper. In uniform, you became a cipher. Singularity forfeited for unity. Conformity more than a unit. Quirks and ornament to unified action. Post-deployment, your uniform recycled. Utility reduced to fiber. Fiber molded into paper, into this blank page. Touching it, rubbing it, reaching for traces of where you've been, your sweat, perhaps your blood. Listen, listen for the echoes of your hopes and dreams, your fears, your overwhelm, your boredom. This paper, its history, its past life mute. This paper, beaming the potential of a blank page. This paper, awaiting tales of the new life embraced, explored. Compost your baggage into nutrients. Reset your course by unfamiliar stars. Strive for reconciliation, for gentleness and generosity, the untasted flavors of laughter and love. This paper with a front and a back, evoking the outside and the inside of the uniforms from which it's made. What of its demarcation of outside actions and interior self? Fertile soil for confusion, for disjunction, for conflict, for days riding the pendulum of anger and numbness. Nights a replay of alarm and loss. How clean the self now standing naked without the uniform, camouflage removed, standing naked, bare naked, a clean body, a smile, yet what failed to scrub clean? Launder the uniform, soap and shower the body, yet cogs remain in the mechanism of self. The very uniform you wore into action pulped into these blank pages. As you from conscription through enlistment, now standing naked before your future. Yet as this paper has fibers, possesses texture, what you remains. Having been molded, assaulted, discharged, but not into peace. I run my fingers across the paper, yet wish they could massage your soul. I do not see your face in memory, yet I see the faces of others. Others I have known. And if I look over their shores, I see a line of faces stretching into antiquity. Were they able to pulp their uniforms into paper, into a clean page on which to write bright futures across the relentless momentum of conscription, transformation, and discharge? The places we can't scrub clean remain unknown to others, and our voices never rise above the hubris of war. The drumbeat of those who do not know, who do not risk, the march to sacrifice, if not of life, then at least of self. The places no one else will ever see. What gravitational forces propel your reshaping of self, your steps into possibility, into unrecognized wants and needs? Struggle has skinned my touch to roughness, yet not ebbed my sensitivity to your tale. Your struggle to recognize and actualize that which is right. We hold this paper, what was once worn into battle, now a blank page, silent about self, open. Well, I could go on reading, but I think what I would like to do is just close with one short poem. Very short. Struggling so today. Oh, there we go. This is entitled Flight Log. Wings outstretched, wooden birds fill the sky, magnetized. The rubble of self takes flight, rising up, gliding eloquently, circling destruction, letting fall bombs of compassion. And so that's the book, and that's kind of the experience from beginning to end. I offer these words, to folks. I didn't start realizing what I had until I began reading, and the relatives, loved ones, and family of veterans began coming up to me and telling me that, and thanking me for the poems, and telling me that they had no idea what was going on with their loved one, what they'd been through, what was happening in their day-to-day moments and interactions. But the poems had helped them gain some insight into that. And I think that is what this book is about. I like to say it's a book of a hand to be handled, but it's also a book of many voices. My job was to get out of the way of those voices. Whenever I was positing the construction of this book or doing the actual construction, whenever those times came when I was at a dead end, trying to get the paper to load, and what to do with this or that, what happened was I would step back from it, take myself out of the process, and rest, and the solution would come to me. And what came to me, I think, was the voices of these veterans and of other artists who had tried to communicate these experiences. And so I say it's a hand in the book to be handled, but it's also a book of many voices. These words are not just mine. The experiences of my experiences and my conversations and experiences with other veterans and their family and friends are in here. They're the ones speaking also. And also, it's particularly, and more individually, the veteran who wore this uniform while they were in their service. So I invite you to take an opportunity with this book to sit back and handle it, turn the pages, feel it. Open your heart to the voices, and I'm sure you'll be rewarded. Thank you very much. Not to be done. I think we're going to open it to questions, unless, Donna, do you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I just wanted to say that what you did for me in reading the book was make visible people that I wasn't seeing. And I thank you for that. It added so much to my understanding of what people are carrying, you know, who have had these experiences, and awakened a kind of compassion in you know, and it was poignant and powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for those comments. Phil's hearing COVID, post-COVID. We're not post-COVID yet, but right now, please don't hesitate to take your mask down and ask a question or make a comment or whatever. I'm open to whatever. Yes.
Are you still in touch with some of the people that you were at war with, and have they commented on your work?
Yeah, yes. I still am. I'm still in contact with a couple of folks that we were served together in Vietnam. My best buddy, my fellow sergeant, good friend of mine down in Texas. And it was, I took this book to a reunion of our fire base a number of years ago. The guys from the 11th Brigade, Maricao, 411 get together. And I took it to them and I showed it around. And I asked them, did I get it right?
Yeah.
That was my question to them. Did I get it right? And uniformly, I heard back yes. So in terms of sharing that with other veterans, yes. And then also now I've shared it in other readings and with veterans and to veterans groups in commemoration of the Vietnam War and such things. Yeah. And so, yeah. It's very much, this book is an open dialogue. It's not an object. This is an open dialogue. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? I like that.
I wanted to mention, because I had talked to you earlier, that this person in homecoming who is being transported in those places is young.
Yeah, that was me.
21 years old, right?
Yeah, I was 21 when I went to Vietnam. Yeah.
And
when I was after I went.
and so are most, aren't they? They're so
Yeah, they are. But you know, I mean, that's kind of the way it works.
Yeah.
You know, you need to be young and healthy and strong to fight. And so it comes to the young. But it also comes, I don't want to digress too much here, but I'd also like to, one of my bugaboos about the Vietnam War is like all the draftees win and all these young 18-year-olds win. I was drafted in 1969 when I was 20, so I've been out of high school for years and, before I went. And so when I was in the service in 69, 70, 71, I served with a number of people who had college degrees that were basic training. Because people don't realize college deferments only work for 4 years. And the war went on for more than 4 years. So we had guys that had degrees in chemistry that thought they were going to the chemical corps. We had guys that had clerked in law for judges. They thought they were going to adjutant general corps. All these kind of things. Architects. We all went into the infantry. And so that's what it's about. It's these young men, young healthy boys. But there were a number of people also. I was 21, but it was not uncommon to find people 22 to 24 also. But that's it. And you're vulnerable at that time. Also more so. But you can be reformatted, so to speak, by the military. The danger comes in the unformatting when we come back. The military does training very well, and training those looking very poorly, and turning us back into civilians. And so this book is about turning oneself, an example of one veteran, turning himself back into a civilian again, to bring it full circle. Yes?
Is your book used in therapy sessions for former vets?
Is it used in therapy?
Is your book used in therapy sessions?
It's not used in therapy sessions by other vets. I never thought of that. We have a copy, a big printout, 13 by 17 or whatever, of Tuesday at 4 on the wall in the Crawford room at the Vet Center, in North Bay Vet Center in River Park, California. And it's there, but no, it's not. It's not. But I've certainly shared it with a few VA and Vet Center related psychologists and psychiatrists. You know, so I passed it around a little bit to them amongst their circle for their insight.
Martin, was that the San Francisco VA? Did you give it, does the San Francisco VA have a copy of this?
No, this is the second book made. The first one was done, offered at a fundraiser for the Marine Museum of Contemporary Art. They have an annual altered book show, and this was made for that. I loved that show for years and never got an idea of how to go, how to think. And then when I came up with this, I finally had a book to go to that, to put in that show. And so I submitted in 2017 and went in and took first prize. Mary Austin, co-founder of the Center for the Book in San Francisco, was the juror that year. And it went, in auction, it went extremely high. It was very well received. And so that was the first copy, and that went at auction, and then this is the second copy. I plan to make at least 2 more, maybe 3 for that, of these. Because there are certain places I'd like them to be able to reside, to be available, so it doesn't get cut out there. And I also did a so-called paperback version, you know, for people that want the poems. You know, that's what most people have asked for. So there is a paperback version of the book available if you want something to take home and peruse again.
I was lucky to attend one of your.
I'm sorry.
I was lucky to attend.
Take your mask down, please, while you speak.
One of your VA group, and where was it, in Petaluma? You met with your group.
No, that was in Santa Rosa. You did it at the Veterans at this.
Or somewhere up north.
Yeah.
And it was very touching for me because you were the senior out of the whole group, and then you went on down the line, and the guys kept getting younger, and they were all veterans from different wars, and that to me was
Oh yeah. I was thinking of a different talk. Yeah.
yeah, all the various wars. It was just amazing to hear them talk, and you know, it was a therapy session for them.
Right.
They felt very, very comfortable in talking about whatever.
Yeah, well, they were among themselves. We were among ourselves at that point.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the things about a group as opposed to individual. You know, you get to talk about, you know, we understand each other, we're okay, it's the outside world that isn't. Kind of thing. Yeah. So it opens up. My heart goes out to all my fellow veterans, and you know, and I would ask that maybe after reading this you have a better sense, and can maybe hear other things when you hear a news report that you might have, and that you might also, in your response to maybe sit back a little bit and have a little compassion. Because the healing and the recovery from combat, repeated combat, is a lifetime process. You know, it's refining and refining and refining. The pendulum swings. You just bring in a shorter and shorter till you can rest comfortably and be open to the love of your family and friends. To open yourself to that. Thank you very much. Anybody else?